Hello and welcome to SAR Histories, where on the channel today we will be visiting the perfect country house, Belton House. Belton House is a Grade 1 listed country house in the parish of Belton near Grantham in Lincolnshire, England. Richard Brownlow purchased the manor house in 1609 for a massive sum of £4,100, around 11.4 million today. Richard rarely visited Belton as he preferred to live in London, where he practiced law and earned himself an annual income of £6,000 a year, which today is around 18 million. Beyond acquiring the estate, Richard had little impact upon Belton. The only architectural legacy of Richard is the church tower that he rebuilt in the same year that he died, 1638. The estate then passed to Richard's son Anthony, who was renamed John, but it was John's nephew, known as Young John, who would rebuild the house. Work started on the house in 1684 and completed in 1688. An inventory of 1688 suggests that Belton was furnished in a simple but modern style. By 1697, young John had invested heavily in a more fashionable and opulent furnishings. Sir John Brownlow was succeeded at Belton by his brother William, who was content to permit John's widow Alice to remain in occupation. She spent the remainder of her life at Belton, arranging advantageous marriages for her 5 daughters. On her death in 1721, the house passed to her husband's nephew and her son-in-law, Sir John Brownlow III, later Viscount Tyrconnell. Tyrconnell was responsible for many of the architectural features which survive in the park and gardens. In 1754, Belton was inherited by Sir John Cust, the son of the previous owners Viscount Tyrconnell's widowed sister. Cust was a distinguished politician, active during the politically turbulent 1760s, and his monument at Belton blames his death at the age of 51 to the unusual fatigues of his office. His heir was created Lord Brownlow in 1776, and Belton was owned by successive Lords Brownlows for the next 200 years. The 7th Baron attempted to retain the house and estate by opening it to the public. An adventure playground was built in the nearby woods to attract families to the house as a tourist attraction. However, the financial difficulties were too great, and in January 1984 he transferred ownership of the house, garden and some of the contents to the National Trust. The west staircase was originally a service stairs and would have been plainer in decor, but by the late 19th century it was in regular use by the family. The Windsor Bedroom, so called following its use by King Edward VIII, who became the Duke of Windsor after the abdication crisis of 1936. Edward visited Belton in the 1930s with his mistress Wallis Simpson, and the 6th Baron Brownlow was heavily involved in the crisis thanks to his position as the King's Lord-in-Waiting. This boudoir would have been used for a private retreat in which to relax by reading or taking tea. The great dining room, now the library, has been greatly altered with all traces of the Caroline decoration removed. First by James Watt in 1778 when it was transformed into a drawing room with a vaulted ceiling, and again in 1876 when its use was again changed, this time to a library. The room contains some 6,000 volumes, a superb example of book collecting over 350 years. Leading from the library is the Queen's Room, the former best bedchamber. This panelled room was redecorated in 1841 for the visit of Queen Adelaide, widow of William IV, when its former function as a state bedroom was resurrected. It contains the great canopied Rococo-style bed in which the Queen slept, complete with former monogram AR embroidered on the bedhead. Other rooms on the second floor are mostly bedrooms, which include the Chinese room with its original hand-painted 18th century Chinese wallpaper. The great staircase to the east of the Marble Hall is unusually placed at Belton, as in a house of this period one would expect to find the staircase in the hall. The stairs rise in 3 flights around the west, north and east walls to the former great dining room above the Marble Hall. Thus the staircase served as an important state procession link between the 3 principal reception rooms of the house. The Blue Room, like the other bedrooms, is arranged as an individual suite. This room was designed by James Wyatt, though it is unclear whether the towering state bed was part of his plans. As previously mentioned, by 1697 young John had invested in more fashionable and opulent furnishings, like these tapestries in the chapel drawing room, which are copies of the ones owned by the Queen at Kensington Palace. Either side of the saloon are 2 smaller drawing rooms, which would originally have served as private withdrawing rooms from the more public activities which would have taken place in the Marble Hall and saloon. The second of the principal reception rooms, the saloon, opens from the Marble Hall. This panelled room was originally known as the Great Parlor. This has always been the chief reception room of the house. It retains its original marble fireplace and has an ornate plaster ceiling, which is a Victorian copy of the original ceiling. One of the principal rooms, the Marble Hall, the first of the large reception rooms, serves as an entrance hall from the south entrance, and takes its name from a checkerboard pattern floor of black and white marble tiles. The hall was originally hung with 28 portraits of kings and queens and emperors, from William the Conqueror to William III, intended to give the house an air of dynastic importance. The tapestry room contains a collection of early 18th century Mortlake tapestries. The final large reception room on the first floor is the Honda-Coater room, so named because of the 3 huge oil paintings by Melchior de Honda-Coater depicting scenes of birds in courtyards, which are fitted into Neo-Carlean panelling. The pencilling was introduced to the room by the 3rd Earl Brownlow in 1876 when it was furnished as a principal dining room of the mansion. The room was initially created as a library in 1808 from the upper part of the earlier kitchens, which had originally risen 2 stories. This barn may not look much, but it is a listed building, and it is being suggested that the corrugated iron came from the old machine gun corps camp nearby. In 1690, Sir John Brownlow was granted permission to enclose an area of 1,000 acres to transform into a park, with a grant to keep deer. There is evidence to suggest that some of this area had been a park since at least 1580. The grounds are just as elegant as the house and are a joy to walk. The Dutch garden was part of the 3rd Earl's restoration project in 1879 and today incorporates large beds of lavender which look and smell magnificent in the summer. The Dutch garden was originally designed with par trees and 40 flower beds filled with spring blossoms. The golden and Irish yews were planted when the garden was laid out, as were the clipped yew hedges which surround it. This line, etc., was moved to its present location in 1921. The orangery and Italian garden were designed by Geoffrey Wyattfield in the early 19th century. Originally, the Italian garden was part of a kitchen garden, which was destroyed by flooding. Though it may be difficult to tell now, during the war, large areas of the gardens were used to grow fruits and vegetables to support the war effort. It is believed that the orangery was built on the site of the former manor house and at the time was cutting edge of design. It has cast iron supporting structure and an artificial stone balustrade with statues which were added in 1890. In the parkland you'll find an adventure playground for children, all made of wood and great fun for families. There is a small maze and multiple walking routes to keep you entertained. The Church of St Peter and Paul is not part of the estate, though it has close links as it contains memorials to the Brownlow and Crust families. Sadly, it was closed off for repair as a section of the boundary wall has fallen down. Belton House today is constantly being conserved for the future, which is great to see. And if you see any conservationists while visiting, they are only too happy to show you how they conserve items, which is fascinating on its own. Belton House is a grand country house, rich in history and splendour. For this, I highly recommend that you visit. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, goodbye.